She walked into the classroom feeling a little nervous. The smell of books, pencils, and the faint scent of chalk filled the air. It was her first day in this class, and she could feel eyes on her, even though no one said anything. She had always been quiet, someone who watched more than she spoke, someone who noticed small things that others often missed. She liked to think carefully before acting or speaking. Today felt different. The teachers seemed ready to judge her even before she said a word. As she took her seat in the middle row, she noticed the way the desks were arranged, the way a tiny crack ran across the edge of the window, and how the sunlight made patterns on the floor. She noticed small things that others didn't, and she liked it that way. But she also knew that being quiet and observant didn't always make life easier. Sometimes it made her feel invisible, like her thoughts and ideas didn't matter. The teacher began speaking, a voice that was firm and quick. He looked around the room and seemed to have already made up his mind about who would succeed and who wouldn't. He asked questions that he didn't really wait for answers to. The students who answered quickly were praised, while she felt herself shrink back, worried that any mistake might make her seem even smaller. Days went by and the pattern continued. She tried her best, quietly listening, paying attention to every detail, hoping one day her efforts would be seen. But the teachers kept giving her tasks that seemed impossible, expecting failure. They didn't notice her careful planning or the way she tried to solve problems in her own way. Sometimes she would raise her hand with an idea, only to have it brushed aside. It made her feel invisible, like she was working hard for nothing. Her classmates didn't mean to be unkind, but they often laughed at mistakes, praised only the loudest voices, and didn't see her quiet brilliance. She started doubting herself, wondering if she really was capable. But deep down, she knew something inside her was different. She had always loved puzzles, patterns, and finding hidden solutions that others missed. She had always known that she could do more, even if the world didn't notice. One morning, the teacher handed back a test. Everyone looked nervous as they flipped the pages, eager to see the grades. When she received hers, it was marked with red ink, with comments that were not helpful. It said she needed to try harder, but it didn't say why or what she had done right. She felt a heavy weight in her chest. She wanted to scream, to say that she had worked hard, that she had thought carefully, but she didn't. She folded the paper quietly and tucked it away. No one had noticed the hours she had spent thinking, planning, and trying to do her best. After class, she found a quiet corner in the library. She loved the library. It was a place where she could think, where the noise of judgment didn't reach her. She opened her notebook and began to write. Not for the teacher, not for anyone else, but for herself. She drew patterns, made notes, and wrote ideas that came to her in quiet moments. She realized that even if the world didn't see her talent yet, she could see it herself. She could nurture it, grow it, and wait for the right moment to show it. Her notebooks became her secret place, a world where she could be free. She wrote about ideas that others might think strange or difficult. She solved problems in ways that no one had asked her to, just because she wanted to understand. She wrote observations about the world, small discoveries that made her feel proud. And slowly, she began to notice something important. The teachers were setting her up to fail, not because she wasn't capable, but because they couldn't see her potential. They had a fixed way of seeing talent, and she didn't fit into it. She remembered the day a new assignment was given. The teacher told the class to follow strict rules and procedures. Everyone hurried to start, following exactly what was written. But she noticed something different. The instructions had gaps, things that could be done better if someone thought carefully. She paused, looking at the assignment from all angles. In her mind, she saw a different solution, a way to approach it that no one else would think of. It was exciting, but she knew it was risky. If she did it her way, she might be criticized even more. She decided to try. Quietly, she worked through the problem in her notebook, taking careful steps, thinking about each one. She didn't want to make a mistake, but she also wanted to show herself that she could do it differently. As she worked, she felt a thrill of possibility. Maybe this time someone would notice. Maybe this time her idea would make a difference. During lunch, she sat alone at a small table, her notebook open. She watched others laugh and talk, and she felt a pang of longing. She wanted to be seen, to be understood. But she also felt a strange kind of strength. The work she did in her notebook was hers. No one could take that away. And every day, every small note she wrote, every careful observation she made, was a step toward proving herself, even if no one knew it yet. She remembered a moment from earlier that week. The teacher had asked a question, expecting a simple answer. She had raised her hand, and before she could speak, the teacher had moved on. Her heart had sunk, but instead of giving up, she had written down her answer. It was longer and more thoughtful than what anyone had said in class. She tucked it into her notebook, feeling proud. It was a small victory, a reminder that her mind was alive, even if the world wasn't ready to see it. Her evenings were filled with quiet study. She read books that challenged her, wrote down ideas that no one else thought of, and practiced solving problems in her own way. Her parents noticed her dedication, even if her teachers did not. They encouraged her quietly, telling her that being different was a gift, that one day the world would see what she could do. And she believed them, even on days when she felt small and invisible. The classroom continued to be a place of challenge. Teachers assigned work with the expectation that she would fail. Some students whispered and laughed when she struggled. But each time she returned to her notebook, she found strength. She reminded herself that failure was not the end, but a step towards something greater. Every note she wrote, every careful calculation she made, was part of her journey, part of proving that she was capable. One rainy afternoon, she sat by the window, listening to the patter of rain against the glass. She opened her notebook and began a new page. She wrote an idea that had been forming in her mind for weeks. It was different from anything she had done before. It was bold, creative, and full of promise. She felt a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. This was her chance to show herself, even if no one else would see it yet. She worked late into the evening, carefully thinking through every detail. Her pencil moved across the paper, drawing lines, making notes, connecting ideas. The room was quiet except for the scratch of her pencil. She felt alive in a way that she hadn't before. This was more than homework or classwork. This was proof that she could think, create, and discover things on her own terms. By the time she closed her notebook, she felt a sense of calm and determination. The teachers might continue to underestimate her. The world might not notice her talent yet. But she knew something important. She had a mind that could think deeply, solve problems, and create ideas that mattered. She had a gift, and it was hers to nurture. No one could take that away. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the first day she had walked into the classroom, nervous and unsure. She realized how far she had come, even in those first few weeks. The challenges, the underestimation, the struggles, they had all shaped her, pushed her to find her hidden strength. And in that quiet moment, she smiled to herself. This was only the beginning. Her mind was alive, her ideas were growing, and one day the world would see what she was capable of. Until then, she would continue to write, to think, and to believe in herself, knowing that her hidden genius was waiting to shine. The morning was bright, with sunlight streaming through the classroom windows, casting patterns on the desks. She walked in quietly, carrying her notebook close to her chest. The notebook had become her most treasured possession, filled with ideas, observations, and small experiments she had tried in her mind. Today felt different, though she couldn't explain why. There was a flutter of anticipation in her chest. She had been thinking about something for weeks, a problem that no one else seemed to notice, and she finally decided to put her idea down on paper. The teacher began the lesson in the usual brisk way, moving from one topic to another without waiting for questions or discussion. She listened carefully, taking notes in the margins of her notebook, but her mind kept returning to her idea. It was clever, unique, and she was excited to see if it would work. She quietly wrote a note, explaining her thoughts in her own words. She didn't plan to show it to anyone, not yet. It was a seed, a small spark that she wanted to nurture before it was seen by the world. As she wrote, she noticed a few classmates glancing at her. Some were curious, some indifferent, and some sneered, not understanding why she spent so much time thinking instead of following the rules exactly as the teacher said. But she didn't care. She was focused on her note, carefully explaining every step, every observation, and every idea that came to her mind. She wanted it to be perfect, even if perfect was just a word she used for herself. When the teacher collected the assignments, she hesitated for a moment, then placed her note on the stack of papers. It felt strange to hand it over to let someone else see her thoughts. Part of her wanted to pull it back, to keep it as her private world. But she took a deep breath and let it go. She reminded herself that some risks were worth taking, and this was one of them. Later, when the teacher reviewed the papers, there was a pause. She didn't notice it at first, but she saw the teacher frown slightly, lean closer, and read more carefully. She could feel her heart beat faster. Had she made a mistake? Or had the teacher finally noticed something different? Something that others hadn't seen before? The teacher looked around the classroom, almost as if searching for the author of the note. Some students whispered, wondering what had caught the teacher's attention. She stayed quiet, pretending to focus on the next assignment. Inside, however, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This was new. This was the first time she had tried something bold, and now she waited to see how it would be received. By the end of the day, the teacher called her aside. Her stomach tightened, but she walked forward, clutching her notebook. The teacher handed back the note and spoke softly, almost as if not wanting anyone else to hear. The words were careful and measured, praising her logic and creativity, though still mixed with doubt. It was the first time anyone had recognized her ideas openly. Her face flushed with pride, but she tried to stay composed. When she returned to her seat, she opened the notebook and reread her note. It felt alive in her hands, like it had a story of its own. She realized that this small paper had the power to change how people saw her. It wasn't about grades or approval anymore. It was about her mind, her thoughts, and her ability to see things differently. She smiled quietly to herself. She had taken a step into the light and it felt good. Her classmates began to notice a change in her. Some were curious, asking questions about what she had written. Others were skeptical, thinking that perhaps the teacher had overreacted. But a few began to look at her with interest, wondering what she might do next. She had never sought attention, but now she realized that her ideas could speak for themselves. The following days were filled with new challenges. The teachers gave assignments that were meant to be routine, but she started approaching them differently. She experimented quietly, testing new methods and sometimes failing. Yet each failure taught her something valuable, and she recorded it all in her notebook. She discovered patterns, connections, and ideas that no one else seemed to notice. It was like having a secret world that only she could explore, a world that was slowly growing bigger and more exciting. One afternoon, a particularly difficult problem was given in class. Most students struggled, some gave up, and a few copied answers from each other. She took her time, thinking carefully. She remembered her note from earlier, the way she had explained her own unique approach. She tried a new method, one that made sense to her but might seem strange to others. As she worked, she felt a thrill of discovery. She was learning to trust her instincts, to follow her own path instead of the one others expected her to take. When the teacher checked the work, there was a moment of surprise. Her answer was not just correct. It was creative, showing insight and understanding that the teacher hadn't expected. A few students whispered in amazement. She felt a quiet pride, but also a strange humility. She knew that this was just the beginning. Her ideas were growing, and the notebook was helping her see them more clearly. At home, she continued her work. Her room became a small lab of thoughts and experiments. She wrote notes about patterns she saw in nature, puzzles she had created in her mind, and connections that others missed. She sometimes read books that were advanced for her age, not because she wanted to impress anyone, but because she was genuinely curious. Her curiosity was becoming a guiding force, leading her to think in ways that were original and insightful. Her family noticed the change. They saw the spark in her eyes, the excitement when she spoke about an idea, and the quiet determination that seemed to grow each day. They encouraged her, offering gentle advice and support, never pushing her, but giving her the freedom to explore her mind. She realized that encouragement mattered, not only from teachers or peers, but from those who truly believed in her potential. One day, the teacher announced a special project. The students were asked to come up with solutions to a real-world problem, something that required thinking beyond the textbook. Most students panicked, unsure of where to start. She, however, felt a surge of excitement. This was the moment her notebook had prepared her for. She began brainstorming, drawing on everything she had learned, every observation she had made, every idea she had written down. She created a plan that was innovative, detailed, and thoughtful. When she submitted her project, the teacher took a long time to review it. There was a silence in the classroom as everyone waited. Finally, the teacher looked up, a mixture of surprise and admiration in his eyes. He spoke to her, acknowledging the originality and depth of her work. For the first time, she felt truly seen in the classroom. Not because of grades, not because of rules, but because her mind had been recognized. She had communicated her ideas in a way that could not be ignored. That evening, she returned to her notebook and wrote down her feelings. She realized that her first note had been a turning point. It was not just a piece of paper. It was a statement of her abilities, a proof of her creativity and insight. She understood now that talent could not be measured by conventional standards alone. Her hidden genius was there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Over the next few weeks, she continued to write, to experiment, and to think differently. She became more confident, not in a boastful way, but in a quiet, steady understanding of her worth. The teachers, while still skeptical at times, began to pay attention. Her peers grew curious, some inspired, some envious, but all intrigued by the small but powerful force of her ideas. She learned that recognition was not immediate and that sometimes people were slow to see what was right in front of them. But she also learned the value of patience, persistence, and self-belief. Her notebook became more than a collection of notes. It became a map of her journey, a record of her growth, and a proof that her mind could shine even when the world doubted her. The classroom, once a place of anxiety and struggle, was now a place of subtle triumphs. Every day brought new challenges, but she faced them with courage and creativity. She discovered that her first note had opened a door to possibilities she had only dreamed of before. And with each passing day, she felt her confidence grow, knowing that her hidden genius was beginning to show itself in ways that were meaningful, powerful, and entirely her own. The days after her first note were filled with a strange mix of excitement and tension. She could feel the eyes of teachers and classmates on her more than before. Some looked curious, some skeptical, and others barely noticed. She had expected recognition to make things easy, but she quickly realized that not everyone was ready to see her in a new light. Some teachers seemed uncertain, unsure whether to trust her abilities. Their doubt sometimes came in the form of extra instructions, extra warnings, or tasks that felt designed to catch her in a mistake. It was frustrating, but she had learned to expect it. She had learned to face it quietly and continue her work anyway. Some of her classmates began to notice that she was different. They would glance over her shoulder during lessons, trying to see what she was writing, what ideas she had. A few of them asked her questions, wanting to understand her thought process. She answered patiently, careful not to give away everything at once. She had learned that some people only see value when it is obvious, but for her, the process mattered as much as the result. Others whispered about her behind her back, unsure whether to admire or dismiss her. She didn't mind the whispers. They were proof that her ideas had weight, that her quiet work had meaning. In class, the teachers continued to challenge her, sometimes in ways that seemed almost impossible. They gave her problems that were beyond the regular curriculum or asked her to work in ways she had never tried before. While some students groaned and gave up, she felt a sense of determination. She knew that these challenges were not meant to break her, but to test her in ways that would help her grow. Even when she struggled, she wrote notes in her notebook, recording each attempt, each failure, and each insight. She began to see patterns, ways to approach problems that no one else noticed. Her mind was like a puzzle constantly being solved, even when others didn't realize it. One day, a particularly difficult assignment was given. The teacher explained it in a rushed voice, expecting all students to follow the exact steps. Most of the class copied from each other, afraid to make a mistake. She paused, studying the instructions carefully. She noticed a small inconsistency, a hidden opportunity to approach the problem differently. She hesitated, knowing that going her own way might draw criticism, but she decided to try. Carefully, she wrote her solution in her notebook, explaining every step and the reasoning behind it. It was a risk, but she trusted her own mind. When the teacher checked the assignment, there was a noticeable pause. He leaned over her work, read carefully, and for a moment, she saw something shift in his eyes. He had expected a mistake, something to correct, but instead, he found insight and originality. A few classmates whispered, amazed that she had done something so different and correct. She felt a quiet pride, knowing that her work had spoken for her, even if the recognition was small and careful. Despite these small victories, there was resistance. Some teachers seemed unwilling to fully accept that she could think differently. They offered praise mixed with doubt, comments that were careful not to encourage too much independence. Some classmates tried to copy her methods, while others laughed or dismissed her ideas. It was confusing at times, but she had learned to trust her own judgment. The resistance itself became a test of her patience and confidence. She realized that recognition was not always immediate, and the world was often slow to notice true talent. At home, she spent hours in her room, thinking, writing, and experimenting. Her notebook became a place of refuge and growth. She wrote down observations from the world outside, patterns she saw in nature, puzzles she had invented in her mind, and solutions to problems that no one else considered. Each entry was a small victory, a proof that her mind was alive and working in ways that were original and creative. Her parents noticed the change. They saw her focus, her excitement, and the pride in her quiet moments. They encouraged her without pushing, letting her explore and develop at her own pace. School continued to be a mixture of recognition and challenge. Sometimes the teachers would give her a compliment, only to immediately add a correction or warning. It was a delicate balance, a mix of admiration and doubt. Some classmates began to respect her work, asking her questions or seeking help. Others tried to undermine her, spreading rumors or making jokes. She didn't let it bother her. She had learned that true growth came from within, from her own persistence and curiosity. She focused on what mattered: understanding, learning, and exploring her mind. One afternoon, the teacher announced a group project. The students were to work together to solve a complicated problem. She found herself paired with classmates who didn't fully understand her thinking. Some were dismissive, others tried to lead the project their way. At first, she felt frustration building, but then she remembered her own methods, the careful reasoning she had used in her notebook. She decided to guide the group subtly, suggesting ideas and explaining logic without taking over. Slowly, the group began to see the value in her approach. They started to follow her reasoning, and the project began to take shape in a way that was both unique and effective. When the project was presented, the results surprised everyone. The teacher, who had doubted some of the group members, praised the solution for its creativity and depth. Her classmates who had been skeptical now looked at her with new respect. It was a moment of quiet triumph. She didn't boast or seek attention, but she felt a sense of accomplishment that came from knowing she had contributed meaningfully. Her work had made a difference not only for herself but for the team as well. In the weeks that followed, she continued to balance recognition and resistance. She realized that some people might never fully understand her mind, and that was okay. What mattered was that she understood it herself. She developed strategies for dealing with doubt and skepticism, learning to remain calm and focused even when others questioned her abilities. Each challenge became an opportunity to grow, each moment of resistance a chance to strengthen her confidence. Her notebook continued to be her guide. She recorded ideas for future projects, reflections on her successes and failures, and thoughts about the patterns she saw in her studies and in life. It became a map of her journey, showing how far she had come and the path she wanted to follow. She began to see that her hidden genius was not just about being smart or creative, but about persistence, curiosity, and the courage to think differently. One day, a class discussion turned to a topic she had studied extensively in her notebook. She raised her hand and shared an idea, explaining it clearly and carefully. Some classmates listened with interest, others with doubt, but the teacher paused and considered her words. It was a small moment, but it felt powerful. Her voice, once quiet and overlooked, had been heard. The recognition was subtle but meaningful. She realized that her ideas could create change, even if it was just one small step at a time. She also noticed that resistance often came from misunderstanding. Teachers and classmates sometimes doubted her because her thinking didn't fit into their expectations. She began to see that it wasn't a reflection of her worth, but of their limits. This realization was freeing. She didn't have to convince everyone, only herself and those willing to listen. Her confidence grew, grounded not in approval, but in her own understanding and effort. The classroom became a place of quiet tension and growth. Each day brought challenges, but also opportunities to prove herself. She discovered that recognition could be slow, resistance could be strong, but her determination and intelligence could not be ignored forever. She had learned to trust her instincts, to follow her curiosity, and to value her own work. Her hidden genius was no longer just a secret. It was becoming visible in small, meaningful ways. At the end of each day, she returned to her notebook. She wrote about what she had learned, the struggles she had faced, and the victories, big and small. She reflected on how teachers and classmates had reacted, and she considered how she could approach the next challenge. The notebook was more than paper. It was a companion, a mentor, and a record of her journey. It reminded her that growth came from persistence, reflection, and the courage to think differently. In time, she began to see the impact of her ideas on those around her. Some classmates sought her guidance, others began to think more creatively themselves, and even teachers started to notice that her work was consistently thoughtful and insightful. The recognition was not universal, and resistance remained, but she had learned to navigate both. She had learned that talent was not only about being smart, but about patience, observation, and the quiet determination to follow one's own path. She understood now that her hidden genius had always been there. The first note she wrote was only the beginning, a small spark that started to illuminate her mind. The challenges, resistance, and doubts she faced were not obstacles, but part of the process of growth. She had learned to balance recognition and resistance, to remain confident in her own abilities, and to continue exploring her mind even when the world was slow to see her value. Her journey was far from over, but she felt stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to let her hidden genius shine in its own time and in its own way. The morning of the big presentation arrived with a nervous energy that filled the classroom. She sat at her desk, notebook open, reviewing every detail of the project she had spent weeks preparing. It was different from any work she had done before. This was her chance to show what she had learned, what she had discovered, and what she was capable of. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. For the first time, the outcome did not rest solely on following instructions. It rested on her creativity, her understanding, and her courage to take risks. The teacher began calling students to present their projects. One by one, classmates stood, giving standard answers, following the steps they had memorized. Some were confident, some stumbled, and a few barely managed to explain their work. She watched carefully, taking mental notes. She noticed mistakes and missed opportunities, and she quietly hoped her own work would stand out, not because she wanted praise, but because she wanted to show her way of thinking. When it was finally her turn, she stood and walked to the front of the classroom, clutching her notebook. She took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of teachers and classmates on her. Her heart pounded, but she reminded herself of the countless hours she had spent preparing, thinking, and experimenting. This was her moment. She began to speak, explaining her project step by step. Her voice was steady, clear, and thoughtful. She showed the logic behind her ideas, the connections she had discovered, and the small innovations that made her work different. As she spoke, she noticed reactions. Some classmates leaned forward, genuinely interested. Some teachers raised their eyebrows, surprised by the depth of her understanding. She explained not only the results but the reasoning, the thought process that had led her there. She used diagrams from her notebook, examples from her experiments, and insights she had recorded over weeks of quiet reflection. It was more than a presentation. It was a story of her mind, unfolding in real time for everyone to see. There was a moment when the room went silent, and she realized that she had captured attention. The teacher, who had often doubted her, nodded thoughtfully, clearly impressed. Some classmates whispered among themselves, amazed at the clarity and originality of her work. She continued, calm and focused, feeling a sense of pride that was quiet but powerful. This was not about competition. It was about expression, about showing what she had discovered through her own persistence and creativity. After she finished, the classroom erupted into a mixture of applause, questions, and admiration. Some students wanted to understand her methods. Others simply expressed surprise. The teacher praised her, highlighting the originality and insight in her work. It was the first time her efforts were recognized in such a public and meaningful way. She felt a wave of relief and accomplishment. All the doubt, all the struggles, all the quiet hours in her notebook had led to this moment. Returning to her seat, she felt a strange combination of exhilaration and calm. The project had been more than a challenge. It had been an opportunity to express her hidden genius. She realized that the recognition was not the most important part. The real achievement was proving to herself that she could trust her mind, follow her ideas, and create something meaningful. Her confidence grew, solid and steady, rooted in the knowledge that her abilities were real and valuable. In the days that followed, her project became a topic of conversation. Teachers discussed it among themselves, noting her originality and insight. Some classmates sought her advice, wanting to learn from her approach. Even those who had been skeptical began to see that her talent was genuine. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She did not need everyone's approval, but she appreciated that her work had made an impact. Her hidden genius, once overlooked, was beginning to be recognized by the world around her. She continued to work diligently in her notebook, exploring new ideas, testing theories, and recording observations. She realized that this breakthrough was not an endpoint but a new beginning. Each experiment, each note, and each challenge was another step in her journey. The teacher began giving her more freedom, allowing her to approach assignments in her own way, and she embraced the opportunity with careful thought and creativity. She was no longer just a quiet student. She was someone whose ideas carried weight and influence. At home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the early days of struggle, the moments of doubt, and the quiet hours spent observing, thinking, and writing. Every small failure, every overlooked effort had contributed to her growth. She understood now that challenges were not obstacles but opportunities to develop her mind. Her notebook was more than paper. It was a record of her perseverance, creativity, and intellect. It showed her path and reminded her of the strength she had cultivated through quiet determination. Her family noticed the change as well. They saw her confidence, her excitement for learning, and the way she shared her discoveries. They encouraged her gently, understanding that her success was the result of effort, insight, and persistence. She appreciated their support, knowing that it allowed her to take risks and explore her ideas fully. The breakthrough in class was only part of the journey. The foundation had been laid long before, in quiet moments of thought and reflection. In the classroom, her peers began to adjust their perception. Some were inspired, trying to think more deeply and creatively themselves. Others remained skeptical, but she had learned not to let that affect her. Recognition was meaningful, but it was her own understanding and effort that mattered most. She had discovered that talent was not only about what others could see, but about what she could achieve through dedication and curiosity. One afternoon, the teacher called her to discuss a new opportunity, a challenge that required creativity and independent thinking. She felt a thrill of excitement and anticipation. The breakthrough she had experienced in her project had opened doors. She knew that her hidden genius was not only recognized but also trusted. The opportunity allowed her to push further, to explore ideas she had not yet considered, and to test the limits of her understanding. She approached the new challenge with the same careful thought that had guided her throughout her journey. She planned, experimented, and recorded every step. Each idea was tested, refined, and recorded in her notebook. She discovered new patterns, made connections between concepts, and created solutions that were both innovative and practical. The process was as rewarding as the result, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was learning and discovery in its purest form, a true expression of her abilities. When she presented the new work, the reaction was even more profound. Teachers and classmates alike recognized the depth of her thought and the originality of her approach. Questions were asked, ideas were discussed, and she engaged in meaningful dialogue about her work. She felt a sense of belonging and respect that had been missing in the early days of struggle. Her hidden genius was no longer hidden. It was visible, appreciated, and making an impact. In the weeks that followed, she continued to grow, explore, and challenge herself. The breakthrough had not changed her quiet nature or her thoughtful approach. It had only strengthened her confidence and encouraged her to trust her own mind. She understood that recognition was valuable, but the real reward was the knowledge of her own capabilities and the joy of discovery. She continued to write in her notebook, document her experiments, and reflect on her learning. Each entry was a step forward, a record of her journey, and a proof of her persistence. The classroom had transformed from a place of anxiety and challenge into a space of possibility and growth. Teachers began to see her potential and encouraged her to explore it further. Peers began to recognize her talent, some inspired to think more deeply themselves. She realized that the breakthrough was not just about a single project. It was about demonstrating the power of curiosity, effort, and independent thinking. It was a turning point, a moment that would influence the rest of her journey. At the end of each day, she returned to her notebook, reflecting on what she had learned and planning her next steps. She wrote about her successes, her challenges, and the insights she had gained. She understood that the breakthrough had been significant, but it was only one step in a lifelong process of learning and growth. Her hidden genius was now a guiding force, shaping her path and inspiring her to continue exploring, creating, and thinking differently. She had learned that talent was not always recognized immediately, and that resistance and doubt were part of the process. She had discovered the value of persistence, patience, and trust in her own abilities. The breakthrough had shown her that her ideas mattered, that her creativity could make a difference, and that her efforts could not be ignored. Her journey was far from over, but she felt stronger, more confident, and ready to face new challenges, knowing that her hidden genius had finally begun to shine for the world to see. The weeks after her breakthrough were filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. She walked into the classroom with a new confidence, not loud or boastful, but calm and steady. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on her own thinking, and to value her abilities even when others doubted them. The teachers who had once overlooked her now watched carefully, sometimes surprised, sometimes impressed. She had become someone whose ideas could not be ignored, even if recognition was slow and subtle. Her classmates began to notice more consistently. Some sought her advice for difficult problems, curious about the methods she used. Others tried to understand her thought process, even if they did not always succeed. She shared her ideas carefully, explaining her reasoning and guiding them through the steps she had taken. It was not about showing off. It was about helping others see the value in thinking differently, in exploring new possibilities, and in trusting their own minds. The teachers began to give her more opportunities for independent work. They recognized that she could handle challenges beyond the standard curriculum and encouraged her to explore her ideas further. She took these opportunities seriously, approaching each assignment with careful thought, creativity, and determination. She experimented, recorded results in her notebook, and reflected on every step. Each success, each small insight, reinforced her belief in herself and her abilities. One day, the the school announced a competition for creative problem-solving. Students were asked to propose innovative solutions to a complex real-world issue. She felt a surge of excitement. This was her chance to apply everything she had learned, to take her ideas beyond the classroom, and to show that her hidden genius could have a broader impact. She began working immediately, researching, brainstorming, and testing her ideas. Her notebook, as always, became her companion, recording every thought, every calculation, and every experiment. As she prepared her submission, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the early days when teachers had set her up to fail, when her ideas were overlooked, and when she doubted herself. She realized that those challenges had shaped her, strengthened her, and taught her resilience. Every obstacle had been a lesson, every doubt a test of her determination. She smiled quietly to herself, grateful for the journey that had brought her here. When she finally submitted her project, the reaction was immediate. Teachers and judges were impressed by the originality and depth of her solution. Her classmates watched with admiration, some surprised by the creativity and thoroughness of her work. The project was praised not only for its results but for the thought process, the care, and the insight she had demonstrated. It was a moment of validation, a recognition of the talent she had nurtured quietly over the months. The competition results were announced during a school assembly. Her name was called, and she walked to the front, feeling a mix of pride and humility. The applause was warm and genuine. She accepted the recognition with a quiet smile, knowing that the real reward was not the applause or the certificate, but the knowledge that her abilities had been acknowledged and valued. She had proven to herself, and to others, that persistence, curiosity, and careful thought could overcome doubt and skepticism. After the assembly, students and teachers approached her, asking questions, complimenting her work, and seeking advice. She answered patiently, sharing insights and explaining her methods. She realized that her journey had inspired others, showing them that hidden talent could emerge if nurtured and given space to grow. She felt a sense of responsibility, not only to herself but to those who might follow, to demonstrate that success was possible even when the path seemed uncertain. Her family celebrated quietly at home. They had watched her grow from a quiet, observant student into someone whose mind shone brightly. They reminded her that her success was not just about intelligence, but about perseverance, patience, and courage. She nodded, understanding that these qualities had been her greatest strengths all along. The recognition was meaningful, but the lessons she had learned were even more valuable. In the classroom, she continued to excel, but she also continued to help others. She realized that her hidden genius was not only about her own achievements but also about inspiring and supporting those around her. She shared ideas, offered guidance, and encouraged curiosity. She saw the spark of interest and confidence growing in her peers, and she felt a sense of fulfillment in helping others discover their potential. Over time, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. She remembered the early moments of struggle, the notes she had written in secret, the times when teachers had doubted her, and the quiet victories that had built her confidence. She understood that each challenge had been necessary, each failure a step toward growth, and each moment of doubt an opportunity to develop resilience. Her hidden genius had been there all along. She had only needed the right circumstances, courage, and patience to reveal it. She continued to work in her notebook, exploring new ideas, solving complex problems, and recording insights. The notebook remained her companion, a symbol of her journey and a tool for ongoing discovery. She knew that her learning was never complete, that each day offered new opportunities to grow, think differently, and explore her abilities. Her confidence was steady, rooted in her own understanding and the knowledge that she could overcome challenges and achieve meaningful results. As the school year progressed, her reputation grew quietly but steadily. Teachers trusted her abilities, classmates respected her work, and she continued to explore her ideas with curiosity and dedication. She realized that recognition, while meaningful, was secondary to the satisfaction of knowing her own worth and the impact of her efforts. Her hidden genius was no longer hidden. It was evident in the thoughtfulness, creativity, and perseverance she demonstrated every day. In quiet moments, she reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood that challenges and resistance were part of life, that patience and persistence were essential, and that self-belief was crucial. She had learned to trust her instincts, to follow her curiosity, and to value the unique ways her mind worked. Her journey had taught her that talent alone was not enough. It required courage, effort, and the willingness to think differently. She also recognized the importance of helping others along the way. By sharing her knowledge, guiding peers, and demonstrating creative problem-solving, she contributed to a culture of curiosity and growth. She understood that her hidden genius had value not only in her own life but in the lives of those around her. She felt a sense of purpose, knowing that her work and her example could inspire others to explore their own potential. By the end of the year, she had achieved more than she had ever imagined. Her first note, once overlooked and dismissed, had set her on a path of discovery, growth, and recognition. She had faced challenges, overcome doubt, and demonstrated the power of persistence and creativity. Her hidden genius, once unnoticed, had become a guiding force, shaping her actions, inspiring others, and showing the world the value of her unique mind. As she packed her notebook at the end of the school day, she felt a sense of quiet fulfillment. She had learned that success was not always immediate, that recognition could be slow, and that resistance was part of the journey. But she had also learned that talent, persistence, and curiosity could overcome doubt and inspire change. Her first note had revealed the spark, and now, through dedication and courage, she had nurtured it into a flame that would continue to grow. She walked home with a steady step, her notebook tucked under her arm, thinking about the challenges and discoveries that awaited her in the future. She knew that her journey was ongoing, that each new opportunity would require thought, effort, and creativity. But she also knew that she had the tools, the confidence, and the courage to face them. Her hidden genius was no longer hidden, and she felt ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that her mind, her curiosity, and her persistence would guide her to new heights.